I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
Question for you, Tom.
Sure.
Are you qualified to talk about music?
Ooh, that's a good question. Who is? What does that qualification look like?
Am I qualified to talk about music?
And that's something that, we got a lot of flack for when we started Velocities in music. Who the hell are these guys? Just talking about music online.
Two kids from Iowa can't pronounce anything.
Right.
No accent, but they can't pronounce anything.
And when the way that I see it is qualifications are really only come into play when you're applying for a job. Maybe back in the day when music review and music discussion or criticism was limited to a variety of publications and very formal channels, then you had to be qualified to some degree, and the way that you were determined to be qualified or not is by whatever position, if you're applying to be a writer for Rolling Stone magazine or something like that, then I'm sure that they would determine whether you were qualified or not. But, of course, with the internet, that has really changed.
It's shattered.
Anyone can do anything, as long as they can earn a following or a viewership or a listenership, anything like that. So to me, it's really not about having credentials. It's not about having a pedigree or having something to prove. The plain fact is you will either get people to listen to what you're saying or you won't. And that's really what it's about to me. And it's people, I remember very vividly once, telling someone, I think it was at work actually, that I have this, this channel that I run with you that we review albums, and he was like, "Oh, that's cool. What makes you able to do that?" And I don't know how to answer that question.
We went onto the internet.
Right.
We found an online certification. It was a form. I filled out the form and hit submit.
Right. It's a very difficult thing. It's called YouTube. You have to be qualified to have an email and type in a URL and
you don't even have
sign
to be
up.
18 to do that.
Right. It's open to everyone, but I think that the thing is if you have a very limited scope of that, then naturally, people probably aren't going to want to listen to what you have to say anyway. So it kind of sorts itself out naturally.
Right.
And obviously there are people out there that are having a lot more interaction, a lot more views or a lot more listens or whatever you want to measure that by than we are. But just the fact, the response that we got from people is very encouraging to me. And that's, I think, what really keeps us going. So I just appreciate that.
So what I took from that is we'll see.
Right. Exactly. We will see.
It really becomes, the answer is really how the response for what you say, what you and I say when we hit that record button, what the response is determines whether or not we're qualified to talk about music.
Right. But I think that at the same time, there are some prerequisites or some factors, I should say, that really play into that.
What are those?
To me, it's how much music do you listen to? And that's something that a lot of people will very much argue about.
Tom, one of the things that you've always surprised me by is I feel like I listen to a lot of music. There was a point in my life where I listened to a lot of music, and I would say I probably listened to 30 plus hours of music a week, and I feel like I did not come close to keeping up with you. How much music would you say you listen to every day? How many hours per day?
I mean, it depends on the day, of course, and what my schedule looks like. There was a time at work when I would be able to get through like 8 to 10 albums a day. Album listens, and that's great.
And it's not just at work,
I love
too.
That. Right, yeah.
It's in the car.
It's in the car. It's when I get home.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends.
When did you get into music?
When I was very young.
Define very young for us.
I mean, young enough not to remember when I got into music.
Wow.
It's something that I grew up having around, My dad played a lot of music, and it was something I was always interested in because I grew up with a passion for music just kind of being all around me, and also being the youngest child in my family, that plays a part as well. But in terms of how much music you listen to, like, you can't really draw a line. Like, you can't draw a line at, what I mean is, to a point of when it's enough that you feel you can start talking about it in public. In a public forum, which I would consider what we do to very much be, right? And it's frustrating to me when, we would do music, like album reviews back in the day, and you'd have someone say, "You've never heard this and this? Well, then you have no right to be talking about music. You haven't listened to every B-side that The Cure has ever put out. You have no right to talk about music." And it's, come on, man, you can't base it, you can't pinpoint it on one thing. And I think that there's still those specific examples that people are going to get pretentious about.
Sure.
People have their pet peeves, people have their biases. And, for example, I would probably get a little bit uppity if I saw someone spouting their views out there and maybe they didn't have what I would consider to be a thorough enough understanding of the Beatles or Led Zeppelin. To me, those things are classics. But there are still plenty of people out there that maybe haven't listened to the Beatles' discography, and that doesn't mean that their opinion doesn't mean something.
Sure.
That's not the case at all. And really, what I think it comes down to is not how much music have you listened to, it's, are you honest about it?
Right.
Are you willing to be open and admit, maybe I'm not as familiar with this or this that I know a lot of people are. But here's what I think about another, maybe related, maybe not topic, and how it works for me. And I think at that point, you become a lot more trustworthy. You become a lot more, I'm willing to listen to you at that point.
How important would you say knowledge of music is when you go to talk to somebody in a public forum about music?
So the knowledge piece is really important. It's a big part of it. And I think especially just because you don't want to put your foot in your mouth and make yourself seem uneducated.
Right.
There are some things that I know to certain people are going to be very taboo. For example, for me, I get frustrated as hell when someone says, "I like Oasis more than Blur," and I talk to them and I drill into it, and I find out that their knowledge of Blur is hearing Song 2 on the radio in the late 90s, and their knowledge of Oasis is having every single one of their albums and knowing everything they've ever done.
So so really it's how they stated it that bothers you.
Right, exactly. It's the way you frame it.
Yeah, if they were to have said, I love Oasis's discography more so than I love Song 2 by Blur.
Right.
We would have been like, well, sure, but that's a ridiculous statement.
It's a ridiculous comparison.
Right,
exactly.
But they didn't say that.
And I was talking to someone once who said, actually I had this exact conversation, so I'm not just pulling this one out of nowhere, but I had this conversation with someone once and they said, come on, Don't Look Back in Anger versus Song 2, it's a clear choice. I'm like, yeah, you're right. If you're comparing a song to a song, that's absolutely right. I would pick Don't Look Back in Anger over Song 2. I think Don't Look Back in Anger is a brilliant track. I think it's one of the best songs I've ever heard.
Right.
But we were talking about this band compared to this band. And if you're going to cherry pick and take one of band A's best songs versus band B's mediocre songs, naturally, who's going to turn out to be the winner? So we have to know what we're talking about. I think there are a lot of cases where people are just talking past each other. And if you're talking at the album level, talk at the album level. If you're talking about at the band level or the song level, stick to that because that's important.
Well, plus people's tastes are very different. Right?
Yeah.
So even if you come from a similar, or if you feel like the person you're having this conversation with has a similar taste in music,
yeah,
people's tastes naturally differ at certain points.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about an artist that you clearly are coming from different perspectives on, as well as your biases, I think that leads to more disagreement.
It does. And it also, it's to that point, it's not even as much knowledge about music, it's knowledge about yourself.
That's a good point.
And people don't always know how to tap into that. And that's something that I would encourage people to do. If you don't like something, find out why.
Ask why you don't like it.
Right. Don't just take it as a given and say, you know what, this is my opinion and I don't need to explain it to anyone. You're right. You don't have to justify your opinion to anyone, but you should at least justify it to yourself.
That reminds me of when we reviewed Harvey Milk's A Small Turn of Human Kindness.
Oh, man.
Oh, man.
The backlash we got for that one.
And quite honestly, that was one of our worst reviews.
It was.
I don't think we did a good job.
No, it was fairly unfair. It was very biased, which of course you're always going to have with opinions in general.
And our viewers called us out. And I got to say they were right.
Yeah.
And I think that we learned an important lesson that day, not only about listening to our viewers, and letting them be the beacon in which you steer the ship of whatever vehicle that you're doing the music discussion about. But in addition to that, we learned an important lesson about ourselves, that maybe our own prejudice to music and our own biases prevented us from truly appreciating an artist. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we reviewed another Harvey Milk album later on, we really liked it.
Yeah.
And I think we had to ask ourselves, why were we having so much trouble with that artist? Mm-hmm. And when you started to ask that question, I think it totally shed light on what that artist's strengths were and helped us understand that artist better, and allowed us, that exercise allowed us to appreciate Harvey Milk.
Right. Because to me, that is the true success of music discussion, is being able to convey your own opinions on something in a way that even if someone disagrees with you, they can understand. And to me, that's the key, is that you should never just agree with everyone. You're never going to find anyone discussing music that agrees with you 100%. But agreeing is not the point. Agreeing is not the point. I think there are too many people out there going and reading reviews, watching album reviews on YouTube, and what they're looking for is validation instead of perspective.
Right.
And there's such an important difference there. They just want to say, oh my gosh, I loved this album. In order for me to feel comfortable loving this album, I have to find someone out there in the public forum who agrees with me. First off, it's sad to see, because you shouldn't need anyone else to validate your own opinion. But also, it's just missing the whole point.
Right.
It's not about whether you agree with them or not. I get more enjoyment out of reading reviews or watching reviews that I do disagree with the person on, because very often they broaden my perspective. And that's really what I'm looking for in any kind of dialogue, is just for someone to bring to the table something that I don't already know. But once again, I think it's important to understand their biases and their reasons for doing so, because the fact is, as much music as anybody's listened to, as much music as I've listened to, every single person on this planet has listened to something that I haven't.
Very true.
And I have listened to, and not that I've listened to stuff that no one else has listened to, but if you put any two people in a room, there is something that one of them has listened to that the other person hasn't.
So you're not claiming to be the ultimate redheaded hipster?
No, not at all.
Good. So a question I have for you, Tom, is, in this world where everyone is entitled to become a music reviewer, and everyone is entitled to listen to an album and provide a score, do the scores matter? Does a music critic's score matter?
No.
We would grade albums 0 to 100.
Right.
Did our scores ever matter?
No, because you're really trying to quantify at that point something that I think is really unquantifiable. And really, I mean, it just represents or reflects kind of your feelings at the time. And of course, there were a lot of albums that we really ended up changing our minds on, and I think that's only natural, but it depends on how you address that. I mean, there are still plenty of albums that, I'm trying to think of a good example. Memory Tape, Seek Magic. We ended up loving that album, but it took us time past the point at which we actually reviewed it to really come to terms with that. But when I go back and watch our review, now given it was one of our earlier reviews, so it wasn't really all that great to begin with, but the reasons we gave for it were valid. Just because we changed our minds on them doesn't mean that at that moment our opinions weren't valid.
Sure.
It just means that the album had a different effect on us later on down the road, and I think that's fine. But what really frustrates me about the whole score thing is people want to focus on a number rather than focus on the things that you're actually saying. And that's something that we got a lot of flack for with Velocities in music, is this idea of noncommittal reviews. Do you remember that term being thrown around?
I do remember that term being thrown around.
Oh, that pissed me off so much.
I remember it being quite frustrating.
It was, because people gravitate to extremes. And that's another thing that I hate to see, as much as I hate to see people looking for just validation rather than perspective, is people, obviously we want to be entertaining.
Sure.
But what's more important than entertainment value is just being true to yourself. And we can't be true to our listeners or our viewers if we're not true to ourselves first. And so we found over time that there's this kind of natural bell curve. That we talked about a lot, Jake, if you recall. We gave a lot of scores right around the 77 range.
That was the peak of our bell curve, right, 77.
Right. Because after that, it became increasingly difficult and more uncommon for an album to surpass that point.
Right. Well, and furthermore, if I liked an album and you were lukewarm on an album, the score range was probably 82 and 72, and that averaged out to mid-70s.
We balanced each other out a lot. That's absolutely true. If you took just either one of our individual scores, then it would probably be a little bit more spread out.
Which we both agreed never mattered in the first place. So it just seemed like this moot exercise.
Right. And it totally was. But I think that that's just natural. There are a small selection of albums that make it to that 90 to 100 range for me. And there's also a small selection of albums that make it below a 60.
And if you never reviewed any of the albums in between,
you wouldn't be able to really calibrate your own opinions. Right. You wouldn't understand where you're coming from with that stuff. But what I hate to see is people who are either thirsty for blood or thirsty for praise. People who just thrive on the negative reviews or thrive on the glowing reviews. Let's face it, the reality is a lot of the music coming out is not going to be amazing, and a lot of it's not going to suck. A lot of it's going to be anywhere from meh to, yeah, this is good. And that's about as extreme as that middle part of the bell curve gets. But that's only natural. Not everything can be a major hit. But also not everything's going to suck. But I get so frustrated. Sorry, this is starting to turn into me just like ranting, I feel like. Just complaining about things. I don't know if that's the case.
That's the point of the podcast, Tom.
Well, then damn it, I'm just going to keep rolling.
Go for it.
All right.
We're going to cut some of this out.
You know what gets my goat, Jake?
What gets my goat?
No, but really, one thing that does irritate me is seeing music reviewers that dislike more music than they like. And that's something, once again, people, we had some viewers of Velocities and Music that would, come to us and say, you guys just like too much. You guys like too much music. Yeah, that's why we started this channel. That's why we started talking about music. We like a lot of music. Why would you want to get an opinion on anything from someone who doesn't like the thing that they're talking about? Why would you become a food critic if all you like is mac and cheese? Why would you become a music critic if you just naturally don't like music? I don't get it. If you're that hard to please, maybe find something else that you naturally like a little bit better. Doesn't mean that you can't have a critical mind about it and really analyze it, but find something that you actually like.
Well, I think it's more along the lines of the, like, what comes to my head is in the movie Ratatouille. There's a food critic in that movie, and he says, if I don't love it, then I don't swallow, I don't know if that's what he says. It's probably totally off. But his point is that he only eats the food that he truly loves. So, somebody who truly loves music only listens and likes the stuff that's just the top, the cream of the crop.
Right.
And that's a little pretentious.
It is. And at that point, here's what I would where I would draw the line. If you dislike more music than you like, do you really like music? I mean, I think it's a hard question to answer, but it's a question worth asking.
Now, does all the music? So, I don't like a lot of the music played on the radio. I'm one of those guys.
Right.
If you take all the music out there that's ever been made to be this corporate jingle, does that count as music? What is music at that point? Like, how are you defining music?
Yeah. And then we're really getting into the weeds, and that can be a discussion that would go on, for days.
What is music? Save that for episode 20.
Right. A little later on when we have some more time to expand into that. But I guess then it comes back to the point about honesty and biases. If you just know that there's something that you don't like, then don't review it. You and I, we did not review a lot of contemporary modern pop country. You know why? Because we just didn't really like it. And we wouldn't be doing that genre justice if we dove into that. But then also you have to talk about, where do you draw the line when it comes to genre bias? If you only like hip hop, then okay, review hip hop. And if you seem to know a lot about hip hop, I'll probably listen to your opinions and I'll be interested in what you have to say. But if you only like hip hop and you know it, and you choose to just review a bunch of heavy metal albums, you're digging yourself a hole.
Tom, are there any artists you like that most critics don't like?
There are a lot. And the inverse of that. So a lot of artists that critics like that I don't like. And I think that's actually an important bias to know. And actually, I think it's a lot more fun of a question to ask people when you're first meeting them and talking about music than like, what are your favorite artists? So what do you like that a lot of people hate?
I have one for you.
All right.
Oasis.
Oasis?
I don't like Oasis.
You don't like Oasis?
I think they're awful.
That's fair. Like, even their like really acclaimed
No,
stuff?
I don't think they're awful.
Okay.
I just don't
Overrated,
find them to be
maybe?
as exciting as most
Right.
people do. Especially their classic album, definitely, maybe. Like it's just so, maybe it's just so overplayed to me that I just
Kind of
don't.
one-dimensional,
Yeah,
maybe.
it's very one-dimensional.
For me, some of those artists are The Police. I like them stylistically, but their songwriting doesn't do much for me. Bruce Springsteen, I can't really get into. I like a couple of his albums, but they're not even the ones that you hear people going gaga over, really. I like Nebraska as kind of a stripped back version of his style, but I'm not all about the fanfare of the classic Springsteen. Same thing with Prince. I don't really get in it, which I even love a lot of bands that Prince has clearly influenced. And for some reason, just Prince himself, I can't get into all that much.
What are some artists you like that most people don't?
311.
311?
I love 311. I love like Cake and Craig David, R&B singer, kind of pop R&B.
Even Rush.
Rush.
Rush isn't hugely favored by critics.
No, they're not. They're they've been said. I think that they're popular enough that they're beyond like cult status, but I think they're seen as being kind of hit or miss. And I think they get overlooked a lot because they've really got a lot of brilliant stuff. But you know what? I will admit one of my very guilty pleasures is, and this just has to do with when I was growing up and what I was listening to and what was out at the time. But man, I listened to a lot of crappy nu metal butt rock of the early 2000s. I mean, stuff like Trapped, Hoobastank,
Papa
Roach, and 3 Days Grace and Breaking Benjamin. And it's funny because really like all those bands, I like maybe their first album, and then like after that even I think they kind of trailed off. And it's one of those things where I realize like this is not upper tier music, but it's fun to listen to, and stylistically it's what I was into when I was like 12. So it's always fun to go back to. But what about you? What's some of that stuff for you?
To me, it has to be that new punk scene. Dashboard Confessional was kind of one of the bands that was really what separated me. It's when I detached, I think, from radio-friendly music, listening to the music that was played on the radio, and then I went into a Radiohead binge, and but didn't fully form there. I got into Jimmy World and Taking Back Sunday, and those are two bands that I come back to routinely.
Oh, definitely.
But I would say that for me, I simply don't listen to as much music as you do, and I've always felt that I haven't been able to listen to as much music as you do. So I find myself coming back to the albums that I really love more. Those being like Andrew Bird, Animal Collective, Radiohead, some of the really indie stuff. Even hip hop albums like Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City, stuff like that. Like those are the albums that have stuck with me over the past few years, that I really come back to a lot. Sure. And unfortunately, a lot of critics agree with me. Yeah. So I don't necessarily feel like I'm a great example of this one, just because there's so much music that I like that critics just in general go gaga over.
Right. Well, and there's always going to be some area like that where things like that line up. But, I also don't think there's anything bad about going back and listening to your old classics and revisiting those albums that have just been tried and true in your life, because chances are between the last time, I'm trying to think of a good example. So like one of my favorite albums of all time, Soundgarden Super Unknown, I'll just throw that out there. That's an album I've been listening to since I was very young, maybe like 7 or 8. And it's one that I come back to regularly, but of course, between each listen of that album or any album like it that's kind of a classic to me, I've listened to other things that are new to me. And because of that, it gives me a different context even when I listen to old stuff. Super Unknown is a great example of that for me because it's an album that I've gone back to so often, but every time I feel like I pick up something new.
Right.
And that speaks to not only the quality of the album, just that there's so much to dig at. It's a very complex album, both instrumentally, just in the songwriting, stylistically, from every aspect, really. But also it just goes to show how your perspective can change and how different something that you thought you've milked for all it's worth can sound just by going and listening to something else and finding parallels between that and other things and going back and diving into it and saying, oh my gosh, this track that I really wasn't keen on for the last 10 years now all of a sudden is one of my favorites on the album. Like to me, that those moments are great because it just gives you this whole new rebirth and a new way of listening to something that you thought you'd already gotten all you could out of.
An album like that for me was always Pearl Jam's 10.
Yeah.
That's an album that, my dad, just because he loved that album, forced me to listen to a bajillion times growing up. And then, I went away from it thinking Pearl Jam sucks. I don't want to listen to them. I'm this angsty teenager. And then, now, as a guy in my 20s, I listen to that album on a regular basis and love it for simply for its raw intensity. It's great songwriting. That's one of those albums that I've really grown to appreciate. The more that I've listened to other music, the more I appreciate that record. Right.
And, that's a great example, too, because I just kind of had the epiphany maybe just a few years ago with that exact album, Pearl Jam's 10, that, while I'd heard it so many times growing up, in the context of the music that I listened to when I was younger, some things don't really come clear to you right off the bat. And one thing that revisiting that album I really found is I'm like, for being labeled as a grunge band in the 90s, which honestly, I mean, Pearl Jam doesn't really feel like a grunge band to me, but it's really I think it has less to do with what their sound was and more to do with the scene that they became popular in and just the timing. But anyway, that's kind of a side comment. But one thing that I really noticed going back to that album is like, man, the guitars just haul ass all the time on this record. And really, the lead guitar style to me harkens back more to like Led Zeppelin and AC/DC and some classic rock stuff. And I feel like that's a guitar style that you weren't getting a whole lot in the 90s when people were focused more on either power chords or just kind of a general minimalism and mood and guitar tone rather than guitar actual chops. You know what I mean?
So to wrap this up, Tom, there were any words of wisdom you would provide for a young, up-and-coming music lover aspiring to become a music critic, what would those words be?
Listen to everything that you can get your hands on, but don't force yourself to like it.
Listen to it, but not like it.
You don't have to like everything. That's fine. And it's okay to like stuff that maybe other people don't. But take the time to ask yourself, why do I like this and why don't I like this? And that will put you on a path that will allow you to be more honest, more open to your biases. And I think that you'll find that people will respect your opinion a lot more than that, because it's really not the breadth of how much you like or how much you don't like or liking or disliking the right things. It's about being able to justify it to yourself. And if you can justify it to yourself, you will be able to explain that and relate it to others in a way that even if they don't agree with, they will be able to respect and understand.
And you may even learn some things about yourself that correlate to other parts of your life.
Absolutely.
I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
This has been the first episode of the Dancing About Architecture podcast. Also known as the podcast with no name.
Yes. That will someday have a name.
Until next time, Tom.
Sounds good.
See you later.